Today, we're taking a hard look at what happens when a new political agenda rooted in democratic socialism clashes head-on with the established power centers of a city like New York.
And the sources we've got are, well, they're thick with anxiety. It's really intense.
It is. The focus is almost entirely on the immediate and, I have to say, powerful industry reaction to one central policy change proposed by Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani.
It's a fascinating case study.
It really is. So our mission today is to take all these articles, these research notes, and these industry warnings, and really unpack the sheer magnitude of the financial and, well, the quality of life anxieties triggered by a single political pivot.
And what is that pivot?
It's Mamdani's vow to stop the city-led clearing of homeless encampments. I mean, this is a very sharp, very public reversal of the hardline approach that was taken by the previous administration.
And it's important to set the stage here. This wasn't just any policy announcement coming out of the blue. The sources are really clear that the real estate and the broader business communities in New York were already walking on eggshells.
Right.
They were, and this is a direct quote, on edge. And not just because of this one policy, but simply because of the mayor-elect's democratic socialist identity and the broader, quote, uber-liberal policies he was pushing during his campaign.
So it's not just the policy, it's the messenger. It sounds like the sources are telling us that Mamdani's entire philosophy meant the business community was basically primed to panic.
Exactly. Primed to panic over what they might see as the smallest shift in how the city manages its public spaces.
So what we're really looking at here isn't just a practical reaction to a change in, street cleanup rules.
No, not at all. We are deep diving into the volatile intersection of political ideology and market psychology. This is where one major policy shift becomes the flashpoint for a much larger, systemic fears about the city's future direction. At the end of the day, this is a story about confidence.
Okay, let's unpack that lack of confidence then, because it seems to start right at the top of the economic food chain, real estate. Let's move straight into those macro market anxieties being expressed.
The central fear that's being expressed by these high-level insiders is remarkably stark. They believe that allowing what the sources are calling tent cities or blights to occupy city sidewalks will effectively cripple the New York real estate market.
Cripple is, that is a strong word. What's the mechanism they're afraid of? Is this just about aesthetics, or is there something deeper going on?
Oh, it's much deeper. The underlying logic is that if the physical evidence of neglect, and by that they mean visible growing encampment, if that's allowed to persist, it just destroys the basic psychological commitment you need for high-value, long-term investment. They argue that this immediate deterioration in public spaces, it sends a definitive signal to potential buyers, to investors, that the city is not stable. It discourages them from, as one source put it, laying down roots here.
So when the quality of public life is perceived to drop, confidence just plummets.
It follows very, very quickly, especially for those high-value, high-risk investments like luxury properties.
And to really understand the weight of that warning, we have to know who's delivering it. We've got specific details here from Ann Cutbill-Linane.
Right.
She's the gold standard for Manhattan market sentiment. She's Douglas Elliman's top agent in Manhattan, and she was the Real Estate Board of New York's Broker of the Year back in 2018.
So she's dealing in deals worth tens of millions of dollars. Her voice is essentially the voice of market expectation. And her standing means her warning isn't just an opinion, right? It's an indicator of how the entire industry is probably going to react. And her statement was so direct, almost absolute. She said Mamdani's plan, quote, hugely affects things and will absolutely not be good for the real estate market.
Yeah, no mincing words there. And I think what makes her statement so potent is that she ties the economics directly back to that daily, visible experience. She emphasizes the concern that, and I'm quoting her again, these encampments get bigger and bigger.
Which then negatively impacts quality of life.
Right, so it's not just about a number on a spreadsheet. It's about a perception of urban decay that threatens the entire premium valuation structure of Manhattan properties.
And this is where the conversation pivots, really. It turns from a complaint into a demand. Because the sources, they don't just state the problem, they immediately offer a proposed solution.
A solution that, I imagine, conveniently aligns with maintaining that investor confidence.
Of course. Cutbill-Linane herself stated very clearly that the city should safely move homeless people off the streets and into shelters and permanent housing.
She reiterates her core view on this. Living on the street does not help anybody. So the message from the real estate elite isn't do nothing about homelessness.
No, not at all.
It's implement a different solution, one that is structured, organized, and critically less visible.
Yes, less visible. That's the key. Remove the destabilizing impact from the, highly valuable street environment. And by doing that, you stabilize investor confidence.
And that's the core market psychology here, isn't it? The industry is basically saying, look, we support helping the homeless, but your proposed method stopping the sweeps is economically hostile.
Because it legalizes the visible presence of social distress.
Right, in their prime commercial and residential corridors. Their solution is framed as both humane and, an economic necessity for maintaining the city's brand. That makes perfect sense when you look at it through the lens of a multi-million-dollar sale. But okay, if the macro concern is the real estate market potentially getting crippled, let's pivot. Let's shift our perspective down to the ground level.
Okay.
The day-to-day existence that affects every single New Yorker, whether they own a penthouse or rent a small apartment, this is where that quality of life deterioration comes into sharp, visceral focus.
Yes. We're zooming in now from the multi-million-dollar deals to the businesses and short-term rentals that are directly adjacent to these public spaces. We have sources like Susan Miller from Empire State Properties.
And her business specializes in short-term furnished apartments in Midtown.
Right.
That's such a fascinating part of the market to focus on. Short-term housing, like furnished corporate rentals, it must be extremely sensitive to this kind of thing.
Oh, incredibly sensitive. Temporary residents, tourists, they have zero tolerance for any perceived decline or lack of safety. They really are the canaries in the urban coal mine.
So what's her prediction?
It's grim. She believes that allowing camping out on the streets will directly fuel more crime and cause New Yorkers to flee, a localized exodus. But what's really noteworthy here is the specific sensory language she uses about the physical environmental impact.
What stands out to you in those quotes?
She predicted the policy is, and I quote, going to basically cause more dirt, more rodents, more complaints.
Wow.
It's an immediate, tactile, sensory prediction about rapid urban decay. It speaks directly to the experience of just walking down a sidewalk. It's the complete opposite of that polished image New York tries to sell.
And she follows that up with a behavioral prediction, doesn't she? Suggesting a decline in the safe use of those public spaces.
She does. She says people are, quote, going to hide more in those little areas.
Which suggests not just an increase in visible encampments, but a reduction in the safe communal use of public space. It's like it shrinks the usable square footage of the city.
And we can move even closer right to the storefront. We have an anecdote from Becky Lynn. She owns Quality A Plus Cleaners near Union Square.
So a small business owner.
A small business owner who has already dealt directly with homeless people, setting up camp right under the scaffolding outside her establishment.
That puts the problem into such sharp relief. She's not worried about quarterly earnings reports or, investor confidence. She's worried about foot traffic, about making rent.
Exactly. And her demand is so critical because it represents the small business owner facing immediate, tangible harm, the kind that hits the cash register every single day. She says that if Mamdani is going to stop the sweeps, he needs a different fix.
Because the current situation is simply harming the business.
It's as simple as that.
If you connect those two voices, Bill Linnane saying the policy cripples the market and Becky Lynn saying it's harming the business, you really see the scope of the anxiety. It goes from this multi-billion-dollar scale all the way down to the immediate reality of a local cleaner who just needs to keep her doors open.
The severity of the language changes with the scale, but the message is completely unified.
This policy reversal is seen as actively damaging the city's entire economic ecosystem.
And that unified sentiment, it ties into the overall source context we reviewed. It suggested the plan, even before it was implemented, was, quote, widely panned as unrealistic. Critics across the board claimed it would inevitably cause, quote, chaos and blights in public spaces.
So the consensus from the industry sources is that this isn't a neutral stance. It's seen as an actively destabilizing one.
That's right. So if we synthesize this, the problem for these business leaders isn't necessarily the existence of homelessness itself.
No, it's the lack of a structured, functional, and again, that word, invisible solution.
Invisible. A solution to homelessness that satisfies their need for stable, predictable, and clean public spaces.
Precisely. And if we connect this localized decision to the bigger picture, This kind of policy has the potential to ripple out way beyond the city limits.
And that's where the local issue starts to meet state-level political pressure.
Okay, let's zoom out to that political fallout, because this is where a city issue turns into a massive political liability for the entire state. We have a warning from the billionaire businessman John Katzimatidis,
Right, owner of the Red Apple Group and a huge chain of grocery stores.
another major employer and real estate stakeholder. And he immediately connected this local policy directly to the state's highest office.
Yes, his specific warning is that if Mamdani's proposal leads to all the problems we've been talking about, the chaos, the blight, the economic damage, the blame is ultimately going to fall on Governor Kathy Hochul.
Okay, so why does a decision by a New York City mayor-elect immediately become the governor's headache?
Well, in his view, the governor, quote, oversees the city. And she has the, quote, responsibility to make sure he doesn't do anything stupid.
A bit blunt.
Very blunt, but that view represents a really common sentiment among powerful state business leaders. If a city executive implements a policy that harms the broader state economy, state leadership is expected to intervene.
Or at least bear the political cost of not doing anything.
Yes. So this turns a city policy decision into a potential statewide political liability. It just raises the stakes considerably.
It really does. If the new administration creates this visible disorder, it gives political opponents a clear line of attack against the current gubernatorial leadership.
For failing to manage New York City, the state's economic engine.
And this political risk is it's compounded by the external threat, isn't it? We can't forget that the sources mentioned leaders in other cities, other states, have already been actively and aggressively trying to draw New Yorkers and their capital to their areas.
Well, for years now.
And their messaging always focuses on quality of life, cost, and safety.
So if Mamdani's policy reversal actually does make the city less livable, or if it destabilizes the real estate market as they fear,
He is basically accelerating that flight.
which means the governor's job of keeping capital, citizens, and tax revenue inside the state becomes exponentially harder. The policy failure becomes a direct political threat to her own administration's goals.
What's so fascinating here is the complete chain reaction. You have a policy that's designed to address a deeply complex humanitarian crisis, but it's immediately interpreted by business leaders as a signal for decline. That signal instantly translates into macro market fear.
Which then escalates into state-level political pressure that holds the governor accountable.
The immediate, focused reaction from the industry, it seems to have completely sidestepped the humanitarian motivation behind the policy. It focused entirely on the negative externalities.
It just shows you how sensitive the current business environment is to perceived political shifts. They aren't waiting around to see the results. They are pricing in the risk immediately based on their perception of the political ideology behind the policy.
Which brings us to our synthesis. What does this all mean for you, the learner, as you process all this data? I mean, the sources we analyzed, they draw a very, very clear picture of the challenge facing the new city administration.
I think we've seen the panic expressed on three really distinct levels. First, you have the macro market destabilization, driven by major real estate figures who fear a complete collapse of investor confidence.
Right. Then there's the micro quality of life erosion.
Detailed by local business owners and short-term property specialists who cite this inevitable rise in dirt, rodents, crime, and direct harm to their businesses.
And finally, the political hot seat. With clear warnings that Governor Hochul will bear the political cost if this localized policy leads to widespread urban problems, accelerating the flight of New Yorkers.
The domino effect, really.
It is. And here's where it gets really interesting for you to consider as you wrap up this deep dive. The sources we looked at, they heavily emphasize that Mamdani's new policy, stopping the sweeps, is unrealistic and harming the business.
And this is a huge but.
It is. We know the previous method of sweeps was halted precisely because it failed humanitarian standards and faced enormous political and activist opposition.
So the city is left with this political paradox. If the choice is between harming businesses through visible disorder on the one hand,
or reverting to a policy of sweeps that was already proven to be politically and ethically unsustainable on the other,
what alternative third path must the new administration forge?
what structured, sustainable, and there's that word again, invisible solution, something entirely unmentioned in our source material, must the new administration invent to satisfy both the critics' demand for stable, clean public spaces and the stated goal of actually helping the homeless population into stable housing?
That intersection of humanitarian necessity and economic demand. That is the ultimate political engineering challenge.
And that's the question we'll leave you with.